Our story takes us to Cleveland, Texas in 2020. Rest in peace to Trena Monique Jordan, also known to many as Nikki, taken from this world way too soon. My condolences and prayers go out to Nikki and her family as they learn to cope in a world without a loved one. Just after 5 p.m. on Thursday, April 30th, 2020, Cleveland PD officers were dispatched to a shooting in the 800 block of South Holly at Truman Street. The first units arrived to find a 49-year-old female with multiple gunshot wounds deceased on the back patio of her home. Several witnesses described the shooter as a black male driving a black Chevrolet step-side pickup truck with a partial license number. A short time later, officers were able to catch up to the truck near the Montgomery Liberty County line on I-69 thanks to an almost standstill due to one lane closed for construction on the highway. The suspect was immediately taken into custody. The weapon was still in his possession. Police remained on the crime scene waiting for a search warrant in order to search the home of the victim. The victim's 13-year-old daughter, who was inside the home at the time, was not injured. It took Liberty County jurors 30 minutes to convict and less than an hour to sentence Philip Jerome Simmons of Cleveland, Texas, to life in prison for the brutal domestic violence murder of Trena Monique Nikki Jordan on April 30th, 2020, as the couple's daughter watched in horror. At the time of the murder, Simmons had been released from prison for just 4 months on a theft case out of Tarrant County, Texas, which resulted in a 20-year prison sentence. He had served just 8 years and was paroled in December of 2019. Here's what we know. Family members say that in the days leading up to her murder, Simmons had asked Nikki to marry him and had given her a puzzling deadline of May 1st to comply. Nikki's niece, Keisha Gonzalez Carr, she shared, "We don't know what was so special about May 1st. He killed her the day before. When the murder happened, Nikki had been trying to let him have a relationship with their daughter, Akila. She finally told him she didn't want to be with him, and he killed her." During the trial, Simmons took the stand and testified that the murder was in self-defense after Nikki reportedly threatened him with a knife. However, his account of events did not mesh with facts, as investigators did not find a knife anywhere near the victim, and the multiple gunshot wounds to her back proved she was not the aggressor. The most damning testimony for Simmons came from his biological daughter, Akila Jordan, 15 years old at the time, who testified that she and her mother had just returned to their home on the 800 block of South Holly Avenue in Cleveland, Texas, just after 5 p.m. from her aunt's house when Simmons immediately confronted Nikki as they entered the home. After Simmons pulled a handgun and shot into the ceiling, Akila and Nikki attempted to flee from the home, desperately running toward the back door. Simmons began firing at Nikki, striking her 5 times in her back as she ran toward the back door. Akila stated that her mother tripped on her shoes as she exited the back door of the residence and fell. Simmons fired 3 more shots into Nikki's back as he stood over her, in essence executing her in front of their daughter. Evidence was presented that Akila ran toward the home of her aunt, screaming for help and shouting that "Daddy just killed my mama." Emotional testimony from a neighbor was presented recounting the events of that day and the fact that the neighbor along with another responding neighbor, ran to where Nikki lay on the back porch, and they held her head in their hands as she took her last breath. After the murder, Simmons was observed calmly walking to his vehicle and leaving the scene with the weapon in his hand. Simmons never called for help or exhibited any emotion. He was caught by law enforcement 3 hours later. He was captured by Cleveland Police Captain Scott Feltz and Sergeant David Edwards on US 59 southbound near the San Jacinto River Bridge. Captain Feltz, he said, at the time, the suspect vehicle was slowed by congested traffic due to ongoing construction but failed to stop. The vehicle was blocked in by officers and a felony takedown was initiated. Philip Simmons was removed from the vehicle and was taken into custody without incident. Simmons was still in possession of that 9mm handgun that he used to kill Nikki. Nikki's family members sat through the 2-day trial in the 75th District Courtroom of the Honorable Judge Mark Moorfield. Nikki's niece, Keisha, said the trial had stirred up a lot of emotions for the family members. Keisha said, "You think you are healed, but the trial opened up things again. We found out a lot of things we didn't know. It's been a lot to deal with. He was saying so many bad things that we know aren't true. He was trying to make Aunt Nikki look bad by saying she was trying to stab him with the knife. We know that wasn't true. She wouldn't hurt anyone. It wasn't in her nature. He even called his own daughter a liar for testifying against him." Nikki's true character was shown daily through her love of her family members. That's what Keisha said. Even though she was a single mom raising 2 children and worked a full-time job as a bus monitor for Cleveland Independent School District, she made time to care for family members, and she was even a volunteer at the Operation Refuge food pantry in Cleveland, helping out during food distributions at Liberty Church. Keisha said she would get up in the morning with Akila, get dressed, and walk down to her sister's house. Her sister had twin boys who had just turned 1 year old. She would help get them ready for the day and then help her sister with whatever needed to be done around her house. Then she would go to my mom's house and see if she needed any help. She would call me and ask how I was doing. I have a special needs son with autism. She really spoiled him. On the day she died, she had baked us a cake and was planning to bring it to us the next day. That's just who she was. She always wanted to help people. And Keisha, she shared that the death of Nikki has taken a major toll on her autistic son, and he is confused and still does not understand what happened to his aunt Nikki. Keisha shares, "Philip selfishly took her away from him. My son loved going to Aunt Nikki's house. She would babysit him. He would run inside her house and she would always have a Coke soda there for him. Now, when we go past the house where she used to live, my son tries to get out of the car. He doesn't understand." Nikki, her son Jamar, who was 18 at the time of his mother's murder, was just a month shy of his high school graduation. Keisha shares, "This has definitely put a strain on our entire family. We love the kids and are trying our best to be there for them. We know it's been traumatic for them, especially Jamar, who now lives in Beaumont with his father. He struggled a lot afterward because he blamed himself for not being home that day and not being able to protect his mom." Nikki's family members who went to court wearing Justice for Nikki shirts were forced to turn their t-shirts inside out so as not to be accused of influencing the jury or causing a mistrial. After the verdict and sentencing, they then returned to the courtroom with their shirts on the right way and faced Simmons for allocation, which is that point in the trial where victims get to share their victim's impact statement and what it has done to their lives and how it has truly hurt the ones they love the most. When I got to the part about talking about my son, I started to cry. While he is not completely nonverbal, my son doesn't understand what's going on, but he sat there the whole time and was so calm as we spoke. We aren't used to that kind of calmness in him. I think it was Nikki's spirit that was in the courtroom. That's what Keish shared. Throughout the trial, Simmons, he appeared to show any type of emotions. He really lacked a lot of emotions. But Keisha shared that as family members started to speak, giving their impact statement, there was a noticeable shift in his demeanor. When we started to speak to him, his facial expression changed a little. I was looking into his eyes as I was talking about my son, and I could see it was getting through to him. That's what she said. Simmons will have plenty of time to think about the decisions that he made that led to him spending what could most likely be the rest of his life in prison, because he will spend the majority of his life in prison. He may have a chance at parole if he lives long enough. Simmons will have plenty of time to think about this though, as he was still on parole for the Trena County case. He must first finish the remainder of his 20-year sentence, which is 12 years, before his life sentence for Nikki's murder begins. Philip Simmons forever stole a mother from her children, a sister, a niece, an aunt, a neighbor, and a friend from this community let's do that again. Philip Simmons forever stole a mother from her children, a sister, a niece, an aunt, a neighbor, and a friend of a community that truly loved her in this senseless act of domestic violence. Philip's selfishness changed the course of so many lives, and the jury made sure his was one of them as they sentenced him to life in prison. The community will always ask why this happened. Even before Simmons committed this horrible act, there were signs of domestic violence in their relationship. This case is the poison fruit of what a relationship should not be. It had so much ugliness with control and domestic violence that was allowed to continue. This case is a prime example of why cases of domestic violence has to be taken more seriously. Rest in peace to Nikki Jordan, taken from this world way too soon. Like father, like son. You see, in September of 2021, Simmons' son, Gerard Dante Simmons, was sentenced to 50 years in prison for the August 2016 murder of his girlfriend, Latasha Green. In his guilty plea, Simmons admitted to brutally murdering Green, a 36-year-old mother of 5, at their home in Cleveland. After strangling her to death, Simmons actually violated her corpse and then dumped her body. The cases of the father and son have eerie similarities. Both men murdered women with whom they had current or prior relationships, and both women were murdered with their children nearby. In the case of Gerard Dante Simmons, Green's daughter, who was 8 at the time, testified to hearing Simmons and Green arguing and waking up later to the sound of her mother being choked. This Cleveland man was sentenced to 50 years for that 2016 murder. And he was sentenced to those 50 years by the same judge, Mark Moorfield, who would later sentence his father. In his guilty plea, Gerard Simmons admitted to brutally murdering Green, a 36-year-old mother of 5, at their home in Cleveland, Texas. Rest in peace, Latasha Green. Green's daughter, who was 8 years old at the time, would later describe the relationship between her mother and Green's daughter, who's now about 15 years old, but was 8 at the time of the murder, described her mom's relationship with Simmons as toxic. She testified that on the night of the murder, she heard Simmons and Green arguing and remembers waking up to the sound of someone choking. She walked into her mom's bedroom and saw her mother completely covered by the bed linens, with Simmons next to her with a pillow grasped in both hands. And according to the daughter's testimony, Simmons stared at her for a moment. She then went back to her room and fell asleep. She recalled next hearing the screen door of the home opening and then a car pulling away. Assuming her mom and Simmons were leaving, she once again went back to sleep. The next morning, Green and her car were gone. When Green failed to return home later, her family members reported her as missing. Her daughter said, "That was the last place I seen her." Immediately, Gerard Simmons was a suspect in Green's disappearance, and police, they were tipped off that he had admitted to killing Green and dumping her body. During his testimony, Captain Scott Feltz, again, who was also involved in the dad's case. Captain Scott Feltz is with the Cleveland Police Department, and he described a desperate search to find Green in the hopes that she was still alive. Those hopes were dashed when Green's partially nude body was discovered in a wooded area along Wells Cemetery Road off of FM 1010. Captain Feltz said, "To this day, I still think about it." During questioning, it was revealed that Simmons was a member of the 59 Bounty Hunters Bloods, Houston's largest subset of the notorious criminal gang, the Bloods. Captain Feltz testified that Simmons was known by police as a violent drug dealer who had been involved in a number of domestic assaults on other women and had been arrested for drugs. When asked if Simmons was known for his peaceful disposition, Feltz said just the opposite was true. Tasha Green was a mother of 5 when she was killed in 2016. Captain Feltz said he has a reputation for violent behavior. "I believe he is a troubled person. He committed a lot of assaults. I believe he is a danger to the community." Simmons' attorney, Dan Bradley, asked Feltz to confirm if Green had been a suspect in several cases, including some that involved domestic violence. Liberty County Assistant District Attorney Mark Beamio, who prosecuted the case alongside ADA Nicole Washington, followed up by asking Feltz, "Are any of these crimes punishable by the death penalty?" Captain Feltz replied, "No." At the sentencing hearing, 30 of Green's family members and friends listened to the testimony. Simmons had no family members present throughout the hearing, except for his sister, Olympia, who was arrested on her way into the courtroom on charges of possession of a controlled substance and prohibited substance in a correctional facility. Wearing a jailhouse jumpsuit after being transported from the jail to the courthouse, she testified that her brother was a very loving person who brightened the room when he walked in. She claimed that Simmons always ended up with Green despite their problem. Bomio asks her, "Is it Latasha Green's fault that she ended up strangled?" Simmons' sister replied, "No." An expert for the defense, Dr. Mohammed Khalid Hamza, who is a professor of clinical mental health counseling at Lamar University in Beaumont, he testified that he evaluated Simmons' mental health in 2018 and found he suffers from a number of psychological disorders, including attention deficit disorder, schizoaffective disorder, and impulse control disorder, exhibits high risk asexual behavior, and has a substance dependence. Additionally, he is diagnosed with a borderline personality disorder, mood disorder, and induced psychotic disorder. That's what Hamza said. And Bradley asked, "Are those things brought on by the individual?" Hamza responded that it was like the chicken and the egg, as no one can be sure if the mental disorders came first or if they were the result of a traumatic brain injury Simmons suffered in 2011 or from his history of drug abuse. Dr. Hamza spoke about Simmons' childhood trauma, from being abandoned by his biological father and allegedly abused by his stepfather, who also was in jail awaiting trial for a separate murder. The doctor said this was one of the worst family climates in which to raise a child. Very true as to what the dad would also be convicted of. As the hearing began to wrap up, Bradley had intended to call on Simmons' mother, who reportedly was in New York. When he heard from her during a break in the trial, Bradley said she told him she had been waiting for the link to the Zoom session. Communication reportedly once again broke down when Bradley's investigator, Lynn Marie Garcia, tried to assist in getting the mom connected to the trial. During closing statements, Bemio asked Judge Moorfield to sentence Simmons to the maximum of 50 years in prison. Bemio said, "This is a person who is dangerous to this community. We ask that this court sentence him to the max." He was sentenced to 50 years in prison. Rest in peace, Nikki Jordan. Rest in peace, Latasha Green. Taken from this world way too soon.